In the sun-scorched plains of New Mexico Territory, 1875, a deadly game of pride and desperation is about to unfold. When the notorious Crosspine Gang sets their sights on the last unconquered ranch in Mockingbird Valley, they believe they're dealing with just another stubborn old cattleman. They couldn't be more wrong. John Hawkins isn't your typical rancher. For 20 years, he was the most feared lawman west of the Mississippi, with a reputation built on lightning-fast draws and deadly accuracy that made even the most hardened outlaws turn tail and run. His name was whispered in saloons from Texas to Colorado. Swift Hand Hawkins, the marshal whose gun spoke faster than most men could think. This is not just another tale of the Old West. This is the story of how the most dangerous gang in the territory learned that some legends don't fade with time. When they surrounded his ranch, thinking to take by force what they couldn't buy with gold, they didn't realize they were walking into a trap laid by a master of the six-gun. What follows is the account of how one aging lawman would dismantle the most feared outlaw band in 3 territories over 7 blood-soaked days, armed with nothing but decades of experience, an old Colt revolver, and the kind of patience that comes from a lifetime of outsmarting men who live by violence. John Hawkins watched the sun creep over the horizon, painting the New Mexico sky in shades of amber and gold. His weathered hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee, steam rising into the crisp morning air. At 62, every joint reminded him of age with each movement, but his eyes remained sharp as ever, constantly scanning the landscape of his ranch. 20 years of peace hadn't dulled the instincts that kept him alive through decades of wearing a marshal's badge. Something felt wrong this morning. The cattle were restless, bunching together in the south pasture instead of spreading out to graze. His horse, Ghost, a grey stallion with more sense than most men, kept turning its head toward the western ridge. "You feel it too, old friend," Hawkins murmured, setting down his coffee. He moved with deliberate care to the porch railing, his hand unconsciously settling near the worn Colt at his hip. The gun belt might look out of place on a simple rancher, but he'd sooner part with his boots than go unarmed. The morning birds had gone quiet. That was it. The detail that had been nagging at the edge of his awareness finally registered. In 20 years of ranch life, he'd learned to read the land like a book, and right now every page screamed of trouble. Movement caught his eye. A flash of something near Thompson's Creek. Could have been a deer, but deer don't wear spurs that. Catch the morning light. Someone was watching his ranch and doing a poor job of staying hidden. Amateur work, but sometimes amateurs were the most dangerous. They made mistakes, got scared, pulled triggers when they shouldn't. Hawkins kept his movements casual, like any rancher starting his day. Inside, his mind was mapping distances, noting cover, remembering all the preparations he'd made over the years. Everyone thought him paranoid for building his house with gun. Ports disguised as decorative carvings, for maintaining clear lines of sight to every approach. Let them think him a cantankerous old fool. Better that than them knowing the truth, that Swift Hand Hawkins hadn't grown slow with age, just patient. A rider appeared on the main road, moving fast. Young Billy Thompson, his nearest neighbor's boy, looking like he'd ridden through the devil's own backyard to get here. "Mr. Hawkins," the boy's voice cracked with urgency. "Pa sent me to warn you. Crosspine Gang was seen crossing the territory line yesterday. 30 riders at least, led by Blackjack Monroe himself. They've been hitting every ranch that won't sell, and word is you're next on their list." Hawkins nodded slowly, unsurprised. He'd been expecting something like this since the railroad surveyors came through last spring. His land was too valuable now, controlling the only reliable water source for miles around. "Much obliged for the warning, Billy. Best get on home now, fast as you can." The boy hesitated. Pa said to tell you he'll stand with you, if you need help." "You tell your pa I appreciate the offer, but this is one storm best weathered alone." As Billy rode away, Hawkins went inside to check his ammunition supplies. 30 riders. Blackjack Monroe. The name stirred memories he'd rather keep buried, of a younger man with a faster draw and a tide of blood that never seemed to stop flowing. He'd built something here, something worth protecting. If they wanted his land, they'd learn why. Even after 20 years, mothers still scared their children with tales of Swift-Hand Hawkins. From his vantage point on the hill behind his barn, John Hawkins tracked the dust clouds rising in the distance. 3 riders, moving slow and careful, testing his defenses. They thought themselves clever, using the morning sun at their backs to obscure their approach. 20 years ago, he would have met them head-on, quick draw and quicker temper. Now, he watched and waited. Ghost stood silent beside him, ears pricked forward. The stallion had been with him since he hung up his badge, a reminder that some partnerships transcend words. Together they observed as the riders split up, each taking a different approach to the ranch. Standard bandit tactics, Hawkins muttered to himself, ain't changed much in 40 years. The first rider, wearing a red bandana, circled wide to the east, probably aiming to get a look at the ranch's back acre. The second, a heavy-set man on a paint horse, moved straight down the main road, playing the part of a lost traveler. The third, barely more than a boy, judging by his silhouette, skulked through the creek bed to the west. Hawkins had prepared for this day. Every fence post marking his property line had a small notch, measured precisely at 100 yards from the house. The creek bed that looked like such fine cover had been carefully maintained to channel riders exactly where he wanted them. The heavy-set man reached his front gate first. "Hello, the house," he called out, all friendly-like. "Might a weary traveler trouble you for some water?" Hawkins stepped out onto his porch, moving with the deliberate slowness of age. Let them see an old rancher. Nothing more. "Water's there by the trough," he called back. "Help yourself." As the man dismounted, Hawkins noted every detail. Gun worn low on the hip, Mexican spurs, saddle that had seen better days, a hired gun trying to look like a drifter. "Mighty fine spread you got here," the man said, leading his horse to the water. "Must be hard work, managing it all by yourself." "Gets done," Hawkins replied shortly. "Shame if anything were to happen to it. Times being what they are, lot of dangers for a man alone." The threat wasn't subtle, but then hired guns rarely were. Hawkins kept his expression neutral, his hands relaxed at his sides. "Reckon I manage well enough." Movement caught his eye. The young one in the creek bed had worked his way closer, probably thinking himself hidden. The one in the red bandana had reached the back of the property, completing their triangle. "Way I hear it," the heavy-set man continued. "Blackjack's offering fair prices for land hereabouts. Might be worth considering, before things get complicated." Hawkins allowed himself a small smile. "Might be you ought to tell Blackjack that some complications ain't worth the trouble they bring." The man's hand drifted toward his gun. "That a threat, old-timer?" "Just wisdom, freely given. Your friends in the creek bed and behind my barn might want to hear it too." The man's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't expected to be made. Before he could respond, Hawkins had already turned to go back inside. "Water's free," he called over his shoulder. "Advice too. What comes next, that'll cost." After the riders departed, Hawkins sat in his old rocking chair, memories flooding back unbidden. The last time he'd faced Blackjack Monroe was in '55, in a dusty street in Tombstone. He'd been younger then, faster, wearing a silver star and believing in simple justice. The street came back to him now, the heat waves rising from the ground, the crowd gathering at a safe distance, Monroe standing there with that perpetual smirk. They'd both been lawmen once, before Monroe turned his badge in for outlaw gold. "You really gonna try and stop me, John?" Monroe had asked, casual as Sunday. "Dinner. After all we've been through?" They'd ridden together in the Texas Rangers, learned each other's ways, trusted each other with their lives. That made the betrayal cut deeper when Monroe started selling information to the very outlaws they were supposed to be hunting. Hawkins touched the scar on his left shoulder, a reminder of that day. He'd been faster, always had been, but Monroe had planned ahead, had men on the rooftops waiting. The bullet caught Hawkins just as his own shot took Monroe in the chest. Everyone thought Monroe had died that day. Hawkins knew better. Had tracked him to a Mexican doctor's house, seen him loaded into a wagon bound south. But by then, the shooting had changed something in Hawkins. The simple answers didn't seem so simple anymore. He'd turned in his badge the next month, bought this ranch with his savings, and tried to forget the man he used to be. 20 years of peace, broken only by the occasional nightmare of that day. In Tombstone, should have made sure, he muttered to himself, checking the loads in his Colt. Should have finished it proper. Ghost nickered softly from the corral, drawing his attention back to the present. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of blood red. In the distance, more dust clouds rose, riders returning to wherever Monroe had made his camp. Hawkins moved through his house, checking his preparations. Extra ammunition hidden behind loose boards, rifle positioned near every window, water and provisions stored where they couldn't be burned out. 20 years of paranoia looking mighty, sensible now. The worst part wasn't knowing Monroe was coming, it was knowing why. This wasn't about land or water rights or the railroad. This was about finishing what started in Tombstone, about proving who was really the fastest gun in the territory. Pride, Hawkins said to the empty room. Damn fool pride. He'd tried to leave that life behind, to become just another rancher working the hard land. But some ghosts don't rest easy, and some debts demand payment, no matter how long you run from them. As darkness fell, Hawkins lit no lamps. He sat in the shadows, listening to the night sounds, waiting. Tomorrow would bring violence, no avoiding that now. But tonight was for remembering, for preparing, for making peace with whatever might. Come dawn hadn't yet broken when they came. 6 riders this time, more heavily armed than the scouts. Hawkins watched them approach through the gun port beside his front door, counting weapons, noting positions. They'd learned enough from yesterday to spread out, staying clear of the creek bed. Leading them was a man Hawkins recognized, Jake the Snake Wilson, Monroe's favorite gun hand. 20 years hadn't changed that serpentine way he moved in the saddle, like a rattler coiling to strike. "Hawkins!" Wilson's voice carried across the quiet morning. "Got a business proposition for you." Hawkins stepped out onto his porch, hands empty but never far from his gun. "Seemed to be mighty popular lately." Wilson grinned, all teeth and no. Warmth. "Times are changing, old man. Railroad's coming. Progress, they call it. Blackjack's offering 3 times what this dust patch is worth. Already gave my answer to your scouts yesterday." "That wasn't an answer. That was you being stubborn." Wilson shifted in his saddle, his coat falling open to reveal twin revolvers. "Boss thought you might be more reasonable if I explained things proper." Hawkins noted how the other riders had spread out, creating a crossfire pattern. "Amateurs, trying to copy professional tactics. Seem to recall you explaining things in Dodge City once. Didn't end well for you then." Wilson's grin faltered. His hand drifted closer to his gun. "That was a long time ago. You've gotten old, Hawkins. Slow. Worlds passing you by." "Maybe so." Hawkins kept his voice even, his posture relaxed. "But passing by is what your boys ought to do right now." "Or what? You'll draw on all 6 of us?" Wilson laughed. "Even Swift-Hand Hawkins can't shoot 6 men at once." The old lawman smiled, just slightly. "Won't need to. Your man on the sorrel's got his hammer snagged on his coat. Fellow by the water trough, his holster's too new, he'll fumble the draw. Young one on the paint horse is scared green, more likely to shoot himself than me." Wilson's expression hardened. As his men shifted uncomfortably, they hadn't expected to be read so easily. "Been doing this a long time, Jake," Hawkins continued. Age teaches you to see things, like how you're favoring your right arm. Old wound acting up means you'll pull. High and right on your first shot, just like Dodge City. The tension crackled like summer lightning. Wilson's face had gone from confident to uncertain to angry in the space of moments. "Last chance," Wilson snarled. "Sell or burn." Hawkins didn't move, didn't blink. "You boys got exactly 10 seconds to clear my property. After that, I stopped being neighborly." Something in his voice, the calm certainty of it, made Wilson hesitate. He'd seen that look before, right before the bullets started flying in Dodge. "This ain't over, old man." 9 seconds. Wilson wheeled his horse around, trying to maintain some dignity. "Burn it," he ordered as they rode away. "Burn it all." Hawkins watched them go, then stepped back inside to check his rifle. They'd be back, probably that night, with torches and numbers and the courage that comes from darkness. Let them come. He'd been ready for this day for 20 years. The town of Mockingbird Bend was already buzzing with rumors when Hawkins rode in that afternoon. He hadn't planned to make the trip, but supplies wouldn't buy themselves, and he needed to know what he was facing. Eyes followed him down the dusty main street, fearful eyes, worried eyes, a few hostile ones. News traveled fast in cattle country. Everyone knew about Monroe's gang, about the ultimatum they were giving to ranchers who wouldn't sell. Sheriff Taylor stood outside his office looking uncomfortable as Hawkins dismounted. Young man, barely 30, wearing a badge that seemed too heavy for him. "Heard you had visitors this morning," Taylor said, trying to sound casual. "Word travels fast. Monroe's bunch burned the Peterson place last night. Nothing left but ashes." Taylor lowered his voice. "I got 2 deputies and a jail built for drunks. Can't stand against 30 armed men." Hawkins nodded, understanding the unspoken message. He'd be facing this alone. Inside the general store, Martha Wilson, no relation to Jake, the snake, was already gathering his usual supplies. She'd been running the store since her husband died in '62, knew everyone's habits. "Adding some extra coffee and ammunition," she said quietly, packing his bags. "Got a feeling you might need both." "Much obliged." "They killed Tom Peterson, you know. Didn't just burn him out. Shot him when he tried to save his horses." "Her," Hans trembled slightly. "Whole territory's going mad, seems like. Railroad coming, land prices soaring, brings out the worst in folks." Through the store window, Hawkins watched 3 riders pass by, more of Monroe's men, marking who bought supplies, who talked to whom. The town was being watched, squeezed, until it broke. "Folks are scared," Martha continued. "Talk is, Monroe's got judges in his pocket, marshals looking the other way. No law coming to help." "There's always law," Hawkins said softly. "Just sometimes it wears different clothes." He paid for his supplies and added them to Ghost's saddlebags. The street had emptied mysteriously, leaving him and the 3 riders alone in the afternoon sun. "Ain't polite," one of them called out. Ignoring the boss's generous offer, Hawkins mounted up slowly, deliberately. "Ain't polite burning honest men's homes, neither. Way we hear it, you used to be somebody. Now you're just an old man who don't know when to bend with the wind." "Wind changes," Hawkins replied. "Man's got to decide what he stands for." He rode out of town at an easy pace, feeling their eyes on his back. No shots came. They weren't ready for that yet. But soon, tonight probably, when darkness gave them courage. Back at the ranch, he took Ghost through his paces one last time, checking the big stallion's response to knee pressure, to the lightest touch of the reins. Might need to move fast tonight, and words wouldn't be safe. Storm clouds were gathering. In the west, dark and heavy with promise. Good. Rain would make it harder for them to set fires, would muffle sounds and mask movement. "Getting too old for this," he told Ghost as he checked his guns one final time. But they both knew that was a lie. Some men are built for peace, and some are built for what comes when peace fails. In the fading light, Hawkins opened the old chest he kept under his bed. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay the silver star he'd worn for 15 years. The metal was still bright, untarnished by time. Next to it, yellowed newspaper clippings told the story of Swift Hand Hawkins, the marshal who'd brought law to the lawless territories. His fingers traced the badge's edges, remembering the weight of it, how it changed a man's stance, his way of thinking. The youngest marshal in the territory's history, they'd called him. Fastest gun west of the Mississippi. The stories grew with each telling, becoming legend. But legends didn't tell about the cold nights tracking killers through mountain passes, about watching good men die because they were a split second too slow, about facing down your own partner, watching trust turn to betrayal in his eyes. He picked up a faded daguerreotype, himself and Monroe in their Texas Ranger days. Young men with matching badges and matching grins, thinking they could clean up the whole frontier between them. "Where did it change, Jack?" he asked the image. "When did gold become worth more than honor?" The memory of that last day in Tombstone rose up again, sharper now. Monroe's voice. "World's changing, John. Man's got to change with it or get left behind. Railroads coming. New money, new opportunities. Could be rich, both of us." But Hawkins had seen what Monroe's opportunities meant. Protection rackets, corrupt judges, honest men driven from their land. The badge wasn't just metal, it was a promise to stand between predators and prey. His hand moved to the second gun belt in the chest, the one he'd worn as marshal. Custom-made by a craftsman in St. Louis, the leather still supple after all these years. The Colt it held was no rancher's weapon, but a precision tool balanced perfectly for speed. "Never thought we'd do this dance again," he told the gun as he strapped it on. The weight was familiar, like greeting an old friend, or maybe welcoming back a part of himself he'd tried to bury. The last item in the chest was a letter. Never. Sent. Written the day after Tombstone. Words of regret, of anger, of brotherhood betrayed. He'd meant to send it to Monroe's family, explaining why their son wouldn't be coming home. But Monroe hadn't died, had taken his bullet and his hatred south, building an empire of violence, while Hawkins sought peace in honest work. Thunder rolled in the distance as he returned the badge to its resting place. He wasn't that man anymore. Didn't need a star to know right from wrong. The weight of the gun on his hip was enough, a reminder that some debts can only be paid in lead. Outside, the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. Ghost whinnied from the barn, sensing the tension in the air. Soon Monroe's men would come, thinking to face a weathered rancher. Instead, they'd find what everyone thought was just a legend. Swift Hand Hawkins had tried to die in Tombstone. But sometimes the past refuses to stay buried, and old ghosts demand their due. Rain drummed on the roof as Hawkins made his final preparations. Every window was shuttered save one, left temptingly open to draw their attention. Furniture was moved. To create clear lanes of fire, each room turned into a potential kill box. He'd built this house with days like this in mind. The walls were double-thick adobe, proof against bullets and fire both. Gun ports disguised as decorative holes let him cover every approach. The roof had a hidden access hatch, offering high ground if needed, but the real work had been done years ago, in quiet moments between ranching duties, shallow trenches dug and concealed, ready to trip running horses, certain fence posts hollowed out to hide extra ammunition. Even the way he'd let the grass grow longer in some places, shorter in others, creating natural shooting lanes. "Time to earn your keep," he told Ghost, leading the stallion to a sheltered spot behind the barn. The horse was trained to come to a whistle, to stay quiet until called. More than once, a good horse had made the difference between life and death. The rain grew heavier, reducing visibility to a few yards. Good hunting weather, his ranger training whispered. Sound would be muffled, muzzle flashes more visible in the darkness. Men would bunch together, move more slowly, make mistakes. He positioned his weapons carefully, Rifle by the north window, shotgun loaded with buck and ball near the back door, his marshal's Colt on his hip. A second pistol waited upstairs, insurance against surprises. The last light faded from the sky as Hawkins made a final check of his preparations. He'd fought against odds before, but usually with backup, with a badge's authority behind him. This would be different. No law to call on, no reinforcements coming. Through the rain, he heard the first distant hoofbeats. Multiple riders, trying to move quietly and failing. They'd come from different directions, thinking to surround him. Instead, they'd split their forces, make themselves easier to deal with one group at a time. "Come on then," he whispered, settling into position. "Let's see if the legend still has teeth." The rain continued to fall, washing away tracks, concealing movement, turning the night into a deadly game of cat and mouse. But cats don't fare well against old wolves who remember all their tricks. Hawkins allowed himself a grim smile. 20 years of peace had taught him patience, taught him to plan, to prepare, to think like prey, while keeping a predator's instincts sharp. They thought they were hunting him. By morning, they'd learned different. Some legends don't grow weaker with age. They just get more dangerous. The hoofbeats grew closer, then stopped. They dismounted, would try to approach on foot. Amateurs mistake in this weather. The mud would slow them, make them clumsy. Thunder rolled overhead as Hawkins checked his gun one last time. The storm was about to break in more ways than one, and he aimed to make it a night Monroe's men would never forget, if they lived to remember it at all. The first shot came from the creek bed, a wild attempt at drawing him out. Hawkins didn't return fire. Let them waste ammunition, reveal their positions. The rain would do half his work for him, turning careful plans into desperate improvisation. A shadow moved near the barn, someone trying to work their way behind the house. The rifle spoke once, and a cry of pain split the night. Not a killing, shot, but enough to send a message. "That's one," Hawkins muttered. "Who's next?" A familiar voice cut through the darkness. "Still leading with your left side, John." Hawkins froze. He knew that voice, hadn't heard it in 15 years. Matthew Reed, in the flesh, old friend, mind if we talk? Matthew Reed had been his deputy in the martial days, a good man with a quick gun and a steady nerve. Last Hawkins had heard, he'd taken a badge in Colorado Territory. "Mighty strange company you're keeping these days, Matthew." A chuckle from the darkness. "Could say the same about you. Hiding out here, playing rancher. That's not the swift hand I knew." People change. World changes too. Reed's voice moved slightly, working around to the front porch. "Monroe's got backing now. Railroad money, political connections. This ain't like the old days where one fast gun could make a difference." Hawkins tracked the voice, noting how the other shooters had gone quiet, letting Reed do the talking. "Didn't figure you for a sellout, Matthew. Ain't about selling out, it's about surviving. Monroe's going to get this land one way or another. Question is just how many people have to die first." A flash of lightning illuminated the scene for a split second. Reed stood on the porch, hands empty, badge still on his chest. But it wasn't a martial star anymore. It was railroad company law. "That badge mean anything to you anymore?" Hawkins asked quietly. "Means I'm on the winning side. Monroe wants to talk, John. Face to face, like old times. This doesn't have to end in blood." Already ended in blood at the Peterson place. Reed's silence spoke volumes. "That was unfortunate. But change is coming, whether you want it or not. Railroad's going to make this territory civilized." "Civilized?" Hawkins spat the word. "Is that what you call burning out honest farmers? Killing men in their own homes? Progress has a price. So does betrayal." The words hung in the rain-soaked air. Both men knew what came next, had played this scene out countless times before, but always on the same side. "Don't make me do this, John." You made your choice when you rode in with them, Matthew. Now get off my porch before I forget we're friends. Reed's sigh was barely audible over the rain. They said you'd be stubborn. Guess some things never change. Some things shouldn't. As Reed stepped back into the darkness, Hawkins felt a piece of his past die. Another friend. Lost to Monroe's gold, another good man turned wrong. The night wasn't over. More blood would flow before dawn. But now it wasn't just about land or old vengeance. It was about remembering what that badge used to mean, when men wore stars for justice instead of profit. They came in force after Reed's departure, thinking the old marshal would be shaken by seeing his former deputy turned traitor. Instead, they found Swift Hand Hawkins reborn, every bit the legend they'd heard about. The first rush came from the creek bed, 6 men trying to reach the house under cover of darkness. Hawkins' rifle cracked twice. 2 men down, clutching legs that wouldn't hold them anymore. The others scrambled back, learning respect for old legends the hard way. "Barns clear!" someone shouted from the darkness. "Circle round back!" Amateur. Mistake, giving away their movements. Hawkins was already moving, shotgun in hand, reaching the kitchen just as shadows passed the window. The blast caught 2 more, not killing but ensuring they'd remember this night in painful detail. Lightning flashed, and in that instant he saw them all, spread out in a rough circle around the house, at least 15 men still standing. Reed was among them, directing movements with the skill that had once made him a fine lawman. "You can't watch all sides, John," Reed called out. "Be reasonable." Hawkins' answer was a careful shot that knocked the hat off a man trying to sneak up to the back door. Seems to be working so far. A bottle crashed against the front wall, makeshift firebomb, but the rain made it useless. They were getting desperate, making mistakes. 3 more tried rushing the house from different directions. 3 more learned why Swift Hand's reputation had lasted 20 years. "Getting expensive, ain't it?" Hawkins taunted as he reloaded. "How many men you want to lose tonight?" The response was a volley of wild shots, more anger than accuracy. Bullets thudded into adobe walls, splintered window frames, but found no flesh. Hawkins had built this house for siege, knew every angle, every shadow. Hours passed in a deadly dance. They'd probe, he'd respond. They'd rush, he'd teach them patience. The rain never stopped, turning the ground to mud, making every movement a struggle. By midnight, they'd lost their taste for direct assault, shifted to containment, thinking to wait him out. They didn't know about his supplies, his water cache, his lifetime of preparing for exactly this. "You're just delaying the inevitable," Reed shouted during a lull. "Monroe himself will be here tomorrow. You really want to face him?" "Been waiting 20 years for that dance," Hawkins replied, his voice carrying clear despite the rain. "Might as well make it interesting." More hours crawled by. Occasionally a shot would ring out, testing his alertness. He answered each one with careful precision, never wasting a bullet, never showing fatigue. As false dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, he heard them pulling back. 7 men down, none dead but all wishing they were. Not a bad night's work for an old man they'd thought would be easy prey. "This ain't over," Reed's voice drifted through the lifting darkness. "Night's over," Hawkins corrected, "and you boys didn't fare so well. Might want to consider that before trying again." The rain finally began to slack, revealing the cost of the night's work. Blood-stained mud, spent cartridges, scattered gear left behind in hasty retreats. They'd come expecting to overwhelm one aging rancher. They'd found Swift Hand Hawkins instead, and learned why some legends are best left undisturbed. Morning came with a sound Hawkins hadn't heard in 20 years. The rhythmic drumming of multiple horses at full gallop, riding hard and straight. Monroe's main force had arrived. Through his rifle scope he counted them, 20 riders at least, led by a figure he'd know anywhere. Blackjack Monroe sat his horse like he always had, straight-backed and proud, a general leading his army. They pulled up just beyond rifle range, making a show of their strength. Monroe rode forward alone, silver in his hair now, but still moving with that old confidence. Been a long time, John. Munro's voice carried clear in the morning air. You're looking well for a dead man. Funny, Hawkins called back. Was about to say the same to you. Munro laughed, the same booming sound Hawkins remembered from their ranger days. Come on out! Let's talk like civilized men! Seemed to recall our last civilized conversation ended with lead flying. Ancient history, world's different now. Railroads coming, bringing progress. No place for old-fashioned notions about right and wrong. Hawkins watched through the scope as more riders appeared from different directions. Munro was using the parley as cover, positioning men for another assault. Same old Jack, never could play straight. Still leading with your right, Jack, Hawkins called out. Still favoring that shoulder where I shot you. Munro's smile faltered slightly. And you're still hiding behind walls, playing defender of the weak. How'd that work out for Sarah? The name hit like a physical blow. Sarah, Munro's sister, Hawkins' almost wife, caught in the crossfire at Tombstone. Another debt to be paid. Shouldn't have brought her into this, Jack. No? Munro's voice turned hard. What about Peterson? His wife? The children you made? Fatherless? Your stubborn pride has consequences, John. Hawkins lined up his shot carefully. Last warning, Jack. Take your men and ride out. This doesn't end well for anyone. Actually, old friend, it ends exactly how I want it to. Munro raised his hand, and his men surged forward from all directions at once. Burn it! Burn it all! The first volley of shots turned the morning into chaos, but Hawkins was ready. His rifle spoke once, twice, 3 times. Horses went down, riders scattered. Every shot found its mark with deadly precision. Jesus! He heard someone yell. He really is that fast! Munro's voice cut through the gunfire. He's one man! One! Old man, push in. They tried. God help them, they tried. But Swift-Hand Hawkins hadn't earned his name with boasts and tall tales. Each rush was met with deadly accuracy. Each assault turned back with surgical precision. When the smoke cleared, 6 more. Of Munro's men were down. The others had pulled back, leaving their wounded to crawl to safety. Munro sat his horse at a safe distance, face dark with fury. This is just the beginning, John. You can't stay awake forever. Long enough, Hawkins replied quietly, though Munro was too far to hear. Long enough to finish what we started in Tombstone. The morning sun rose fully, revealing the carnage of 2 attacks. But Munro had brought 20 fresh riders, and the day was just beginning. The legend of Swift-Hand would be tested sorely before nightfall. The sun climbed high as Hawkins tended to his defenses. Spent cartridges were collected, weapons cleaned, ammunition redistributed to key positions. Through his gun ports, he watched Munro's men doing the same, setting up a proper siege now. They'd learned respect the hard way, no more wild rushes or amateur tactics. Munro had them digging in, building firing positions, settling in for a long fight. Professional work, finally. Reed approached under a white flag, medical bag in hand. Got wounded men out here, John. Let me treat them. Hawkins considered it. The deputy-turned-traitor was still a better man than most in Munro's gang. Keep your hands where I can see them. No tricks. Reed moved among the fallen, bandaging. Wounds, setting breaks. 9 men down now between the night attack and morning assault. None dead. Swift-Hand's mercy was as legendary as his speed. You've made your point, Reed said as he worked. Munro's offering double his original price now. Triple, if you sign today. Not about money. Never was. Then what? Pride? Revenge? Reed straightened up, looking at the house. How long can you hold out alone? We've got supplies coming, reinforcements, railroad boys with military experience. Hawkins watched a wounded man being helped onto a horse. Tell Munro he's got 1 hour to clear his people out. After that, I stop being careful about where I shoot. Reed's face hardened. You're signing death warrants, John, not just yours. Think about the others. Like Peterson, his family. That wasn't supposed to happen. Things got out of hand. Things always get out of hand when men choose money over right. Hawkins checked his rifle absently. 1 hour, Matthew. Make it count. Reed walked back to Monroe's lines, shaking his head. Behind him, the wounded were being evacuated, carried or helped onto horses. The siege line was tightening, men working, in pairs to establish crossfire positions. Hawkins used the lull to check his own wounds. Nothing serious, just grazes and splinters from near misses. His supplies would last another 3 days at least. Water wasn't a problem with the rain. Cistern full, but ammunition. That might get tight if this dragged on. He'd have to make every shot count, more than usual. Through his scope, he studied Monroe's men. Most were typical hired guns, in it for money. But some moved differently. Military, training, or proper gunfighting experience. Those would be the dangerous ones when night fell again. A movement caught his eye. Monroe himself talking with Reed. Even at this distance, their argument was clear in their gestures. Reed pointing at the wounded, Monroe dismissing them with a wave. Some things don't change, Hawkins muttered. Monroe had always considered men expendable, pieces to be sacrificed in his games. That's what had started their falling out, long before the badge turning and betrayal. The hour passed slowly. No one left. Instead, more riders appeared on the horizon, the reinforcements Reed had mentioned. This wasn't going to end with talk or surrender. Too much pride, too much history. Hawkins checked his guns one final time. The legend of Swift Hand had been built on speed and accuracy. Now it would be tested by endurance and will. Let them come. Some debts can only be paid in blood. The afternoon brought an unexpected complication. A lone rider approached from the east, moving fast and reckless. Not one of Monroe's men. The horse was wrong and the rider too small. Through his scope, Hawkins saw long, dark hair streaming in the wind. A woman, no, a girl, barely 20 by the look of her. She rode straight, through Monroe's lines before they could react, reining up hard at Hawkins's front gate. "Mr. Hawkins," her voice was young but steady, "need to speak with you." Monroe's men were scrambling, unsure how to handle this interruption. Reed moved to intercept her, but Monroe waved him back, watching with obvious interest. "Kinda busy. At the moment," Hawkins called back. "Might want to clear out before the lead starts flying again." "Can't do that. Name's Mary Peterson, Tom Peterson's daughter." Hawkins felt his heart sink. Peterson's girl, the one who'd been away at school in St. Louis, must have ridden day and night when she heard the news. "Your pa was a good man," he said softly. "I'm sorry about what happened. Didn't come for sympathy." She sat her horse proudly, ignoring the armed men surrounding her. "Came to warn you. Monroe's got 50 more men coming up from the south. They've been burning every ranch that won't sell, all the way up from Green Valley." Monroe's laugh carried across the yard. "Admire your spirit, girl, but you're interrupting a private business discussion." Mary turned in her saddle, facing him. "Like you discussed business with my father, before you shot him in his own barn." "Accidents happen in times of progress," Monroe replied smoothly. "Your father was unreasonable, like our friend here." "My father was honest." Her voice cracked slightly. "All he wanted was to keep his land, raise his horses, and you murdered him for it." Hawkins watched the scene unfold, noting how Monroe's men were moving to cut off her. Retreat. This could turn ugly fast. "Miss Peterson," he called out, "might want to step inside. Getting dangerous out there." She wheeled her horse toward the house. Monroe's voice stopped her. "Ride away, girl. Your father chose his fate. Don't make his mistake." "He chose right over wrong," she replied, "like Mr. Hawkins here." She dismounted at Hawkins' porch, moving quick and sure. "And I'm choosing the same." Hawkins got her inside just as the first shots rang out. Her horse bolted, but that was expected. Better than Monroe's men getting another mount. 50 men? He asked as she caught her breath. At least. They're burning everything south of Green Valley. Railroads buying up the ashes cheap. Her eyes were hard, aged beyond their years. They killed my father while I was away at school. Didn't even know until I came home to ashes. Hawkins checked his ammunition again. 50 more guns would change things considerably. You took a big risk riding in like that. Had to warn you. You're the only one standing against them now. The only one who can stop this. He studied her face, seeing shadows of her father there. Tom Peterson had been a good man, honest and strong. His daughter had his spirit. Won't be easy, he warned. Might not end well. Already didn't end well, she replied, checking the revolver she'd kept hidden in her skirts. But maybe we can make it end right. Hawkins nodded slowly. The legend of Swift Hand had always been about one man standing against many. But sometimes, he reflected, legends need help to stay alive. Fire lit the evening sky to the south, marking where Monroe's. Reinforcements were making their way up the valley. 3 more ranches burning, Mary said. Good men driven off their land or killed resisting. They'll hit the Thompson place next, she warned, helping Hawkins reload cartridges. Her hands were steady, familiar with the work. Billy's father won't. Leave, says his grandfather built that ranch. Hawkins watched the fires through his scope. Monroe's tactics were changing, becoming more brutal, no more pretense of legitimate business, just raw violence and terror. Your father teach you to shoot? He asked, noting how she handled the revolver. Every Sunday after church, said a woman alone needs to protect herself. Her voice caught slightly. Didn't help him much in the end. Monroe's men had been quiet since her arrival, regrouping, planning. Reed approached the house again, hands raised. Got a message from the boss, he called out. Girls free to leave. This is between old friends. Tell Monroe the time for messages is past, Hawkins replied. Should have thought about talking before he started burning homes. Don't be a fool, John. You've got an innocent girl in there now. Think about her safety. Mary's answer was a carefully aimed shot that kicked up dust at Reed's feet. My safety wasn't a concern when you murdered my father. Reed backed away quickly. Through the scope, Hawkins saw Monroe laughing, obviously amused by the girl's spirit. But there was calculation in his eyes, too. A new piece on the board, changing the game. They'll use you to get to me, Hawkins warned. Monroe fights dirty when he's pushed. Let them try. She finished loading another box of cartridges. I watched them burn my home from the hills. Watched them laugh while my father's body fed the flames. Been waiting for a chance to make it right. Night was falling again. But the fires to the south painted everything in flickering shades of orange and red. More riders were visible now, joining Monroe's siege line. The odds were getting worse by the hour. Thompson Place is burning, Mary reported from the upstairs window. Can see it from here. Hawkins felt the weight of every year in that moment. One old gunfighter and a grieving girl against an army of killers, the stuff of dime novels. Except there was nothing romantic. But watching good people's lives go up in smoke. Still time for you to slip away, he offered. Got a hidden trail through the creek bed. Could make it to town before they knew you were gone. She checked her father's revolver one more time. Running's what they expect. What they want. Everyone too scared to stand and fight. But sometimes you have to plant your feet and say, no more. More riders arrived as full dark settled in. Monroe was taking his time now, building his forces, tightening the noose. Tomorrow would bring the full assault, when his reinforcements were all in place. Get some rest, Hawkins told her. Tomorrow's going to be a hard day. They're all hard days now, she replied, but took his advice, settling into a corner with her gun close at hand. Hawkins watched the fires burn against the night sky. Sometimes a legend wasn't about being the fastest gun or the bravest heart. Sometimes it was just about being the one who refused to bow, no matter the cost, Tomorrow would test that resolve to its limits. They came with the noon sun at their backs, using its glare for cover. Monroe had gathered his full strength now. Mary counted 70 riders at least, spread out in a wide crescent around the ranch. "Remember," Hawkins told her as they took their positions, "shoot to wound if you can. Dead men can't change their minds about right and wrong." The first wave hit like a thunderstorm, lead filling the air from all directions, but Hawkins had built his home for siege, and every window, every gun port had been carefully placed. Their return fire was precise, methodical, turning the assault into chaos. "Left side," Mary called out, her voice steady as she dropped a man trying to reach the barn. Her father's revolver barked twice more, proving Peterson had taught his daughter well. Monroe directed the assault from horseback, still playing general. His voice carried over the gunfire. "Push in! He can't watch all sides!" But Swift-Hand Hawkins hadn't lived by reputation alone. His rifle spoke in a deadly rhythm. One shot. One man down. No wasted bullets, no wild firing. Just the practiced precision that had made him legend. "They're pulling back," Mary reported from her upstairs position. "Regrouping by the creek." The first assault had cost Monroe 8 men, with twice that many nursing wounds. But he had numbers to spare now, and the railroad's deep pockets behind him. "Second wave coming," Hawkins warned. "Bigger this time. They'll try to overwhelm us with numbers." He was right. They came in force, using mounted men to draw fire, while others worked closer on foot. Lead chipped adobe walls, splintered wood, turned the air thick with powder smoke. But legends aren't born from luck alone. Every rush was met with deadly accuracy. Every flanking attempt countered before it could develop. The ranch house became a fortress, and its defenders proved worthy of the songs that would later be sung. "Running low on rifle rounds," Mary called. "Down during a lull. Got plenty for the revolvers, though." "Make each shot count," Hawkins replied, dropping another man trying to reach the water trough. "Quality beats quantity." Monroe's fury was visible even at this distance. Half his force was down now, dead or wounded with nothing to show for it. His next move proved desperate, sending 20 men in a suicide rush from multiple directions. "God forgive me," Hawkins muttered, and for the first time that day he aimed to kill. His rifle cracked 5 times in rapid succession, each shot finding a vital spot. Mary's revolver added its voice, and the rush broke like a wave on rocks. When the smoke cleared, Monroe had pulled his men back out of range. The yard was littered with bodies and spent cartridges, the afternoon sun painting everything in shades of blood and brass. "Quite a showing, John," Monroe shouted across the battlefield. "But you're almost out of ammunition. We counted your shots. Can't keep this up forever." He wasn't wrong. Hawkins checked his remaining cartridges. Barely. Enough for one more serious fight. But sometimes victories aren't won with bullets alone. "Your men are watching, Jack," he called back. "Watching you spend their lives like pennies. How many more you want to sacrifice for your pride?" The silence that followed suggested his words had found their mark. Even hired guns have their limits. And Monroe's men had seen too many comrades fall to an old man's skill and a girl's courage. The legend of Swift-Hand was being reborn in blood and gunsmoke, but the real battle was just beginning. Night would come again, and with it, Monroe's last desperate gamble. As evening approached, Reed appeared again under flag of truce. This time he wasn't alone. He brought Martha Wilson from the general store with him. "Got something you need." "To hear, John," Reed called out, "about who really killed Tom Peterson." Mary tensed beside Hawkins, her father's revolver rising slightly. He put a gentle hand on her arm. "Let's hear him out." Martha looked uncomfortable, but Reed urged her forward. "Tell them what you saw, Martha." She hesitated, glancing back at Monroe's lines. "I was there that night at Peterson's ranch, saw everything." "Go on," Reed prompted. "It wasn't Monroe's men who shot Tom. It was Sheriff Taylor. Tom caught him taking railroad money. threatened to expose him. The fire was just to cover it up. Hawkins watched Martha's face carefully. The storekeeper was a terrible liar, always had been. He could see the fear in her eyes, the way she kept glancing at Monroe. "That's not true," Mary said quietly. "I found my father's journal after. He wrote about Monroe's threats, about the railroad's offers. Girl's upset, not thinking straight." Reed cut in quickly. "Martha's a respected member of the community. Her word counts for something." Hawkins had heard enough. "How much they pay you to say that, Martha, or did they threaten your store?" Martha's face crumpled. "I'm sorry, John. They've got my boy. Said they'd hurt him if I didn't." "That's enough!" Reed's voice cracked like a whip. "Deal's off. You had your chance." But the damage was done. Among Monroe's men, Hawkins could see uncertainty spreading. Hired guns would kill for money, but threatening women and children, holding hostages, that was different. "Where's her boy, Matthew?" Hawkins asked quietly. "In all those years wearing a badge, did you ever think you'd be the kind holding children hostage?" "Times change," Reed replied, but there was shame in his voice now. World's getting civilized, got to change with it. Civilization doesn't come from the barrel of a gun. Hawkins kept his voice carrying, letting Monroe's men hear every word. Doesn't come from burning homes and threatening families. Martha was crying openly now. "They've got him in the old mine, John. My Tommy, please." More muttering from Monroe's lines. Even hardened gunmen had limits to what they'd stomach, and this was crossing them. "You're losing them, Jack," Hawkins called out. "They signed on for a range war, not kidnapping children." Monroe's response was predictable. He shot Martha where she stood. But that was his final mistake. The sound of her body hitting the ground was like a signal. Men began pulling out, first one or two, then whole groups. No one wanted to ride with a man who'd shoot an unarmed woman in cold blood. "Get back here!" Monroe raged. "I'll kill anyone who runs!" But his authority was broken. Within minutes, half his remaining force had melted away into the gathering darkness. Even Reed looked sick, backing away from what his old friend had become. "Just you and me now, Jack," Hawkins called into the twilight, like it was always going to be. The legend of Swift Hand would end as it began. Two men, their shared past, and the weight of choices that couldn't be undone. Night fell like a curtain over the battlefield, bringing no peace. Monroe still had 15 loyal men, the hardest. Cases those too committed to his cause or too guilty of past crimes to walk away. "They'll try burning us out," Hawkins told Mary as they made final preparations. "It's what Jack always did when he ran out of options." She nodded, helping him soak blankets in water from the rain barrel. "How many rounds left?" 23. Rifle, 38 revolver. He checked his guns with practiced hands. Got to make every shot tell now. The attack came at midnight, not with gunfire, but with burning arrows and oil-soaked torches. The night lit up as flaming missiles arced toward the house from all directions. But Hawkins hadn't survived 20 years as a lawman by being unprepared. The wet blankets caught most arrows, and the adobe walls refused to burn. Those few flames that caught were quickly doused. "Running out of oil, boss," someone called from the darkness. "House ain't catching." Monroe's response was savage. "Then burn everything else, the barn, the corrals, every blade of grass. Smoke them out." The barn went up first, despite their best efforts to save it. Ghost had already been moved to a hidden gully, but the sight of flames consuming 20 years of honest work cut deep. "My father's ranch burned like this," Mary said quietly, picking off a man who got too bold with his torch. "Everything he built gone in an hour." Hawkins watched his barn collapse in flames. Buildings can be rebuilt, right and wrong, that's what matters now. Through the night they fought, not with guns but with water and wet sacks, beating back the flames that threatened to consume everything. Monroe's men kept up sporadic fire, more to pin them down than to kill. "Getting low on water," Mary reported near dawn. "Won't be able to fight many more fires." Hawkins studied the burning ruins of his ranch. The barn was gone, the corrals destroyed, his hay storage a smoking ruin. But the house still stood, its thick walls blackened but undefeated. "Dawn's coming," he said, checking his ammunition one last time. "Jack never could stand waiting. He'll make his move soon." As if in answer, Monroe's voice carried through the smoke-filled air. "One last chance, John. You've lost everything. Now, no sense dying for ashes. Still got right on my side, Jack. More than you can say." The eastern sky began to lighten, turning the smoke pink and gold. Through gaps in the haze, Hawkins could see Monroe's remaining men gathering for one final assault. "This is it," he told Mary. "Whatever happens, you've done your father proud." She checked her revolver, face set with determination. "Let's finish this, for my father, for Martha, for everyone they've hurt." Hawkins nodded, feeling the weight of his marshal's gun at his hip. 20 years of peace had led to this moment. Time to show them why Swift Hand was more than just a legend. Dawn was breaking over the New Mexico territory, and with it would come the final act of a story 20 years in the making. The first light of dawn revealed the full devastation. Hawkins's ranch lay in ruins, smoke rising from burned buildings, the ground littered with spent cartridges and fallen men. But the house still stood, and within it, the legend lived on. Monroe made his final play as the sun crested the horizon. His remaining men spread out in a wide arc, each carrying extra ammunition and dynamite. No more subtle tactics, no more strategy, just raw force and desperation. "You know what's coming, John," Monroe shouted. "Can't stop us all." Hawkins positioned, Mary at the back window, taking the front himself. "When it starts, shoot straight and keep shooting. Don't stop for anything." The assault began with dynamite. 3 charges thrown simultaneously at different parts of the house. The explosions shook the adobe walls but couldn't break them. Through the smoke and dust, Monroe's men charged. Swift Hand's legend had been built on speed and accuracy. Now, in what might be his final fight, Hawkins proved why. His rifle cracked in a deadly rhythm, each shot finding its mark. 3 men fell before they crossed half the distance. Mary held her own at the back, her father's revolver speaking with authority. 2 more went down, trying to breach the rear door. But numbers and desperation were fearsome weapons. The attackers reached the walls, pressing tight against the adobe, where the defenders' guns couldn't find them. More dynamite was produced. "Get ready," Hawkins called. "When the walls go, give them everything." The explosion seemed to lift the house off its foundation. Dust filled the air, thick enough to choke on. Through the breach, Monroe's men poured in like a human tide. The close quarters turned the fight into chaos. Hawkins's rifle was useless now. He switched to his marshal's revolver, the gun that had made him legend. Each shot was perfect, each movement precise despite his age. Mary's scream cut through the gunsmoke. Someone had gotten behind her. Hawkins turned, firing in one smooth motion. The man fell, but more were coming. "Running!"
"Try!"
Mary called out, switching to her last cylinder of ammunition. Hawkins did a quick count. 6 rounds left in his gun, maybe 10 more on his belt. Not enough. Not nearly enough. Then Reed's voice rang out from outside. "That's enough. Stand down!" Through the settling dust, Hawkins saw his old deputy standing in the doorway, badge glinting in the morning sun. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood Sheriff Taylor and a dozen armed townsmen. "This ends now," Reed announced. "Monroe's under arrest for Martha Wilson's murder. Anyone wants to join him, just keep shooting." The fight went out of Monroe's. Men like air from a punctured balloon. Guns clattered to the floor as hands raised in surrender. Only Monroe himself remained defiant, backed into a corner, gun still raised. "You're choosing the wrong side, Matthew. Progress can't be stopped." "Progress ain't murder," Reed replied. "Took me too long to remember that." The legend of Swift Hand had begun with one man standing against many. Now, as the morning sun filled the smoke-torn room, that legend would reach its bloody conclusion. Time seemed to slow as Monroe leveled his gun at Reed. 20 years of history, betrayal, and blood had led to this moment. But before he could pull the trigger, Hawkins' voice cut through the tension. "Face me, Jack, one last time." Monroe turned, a wild grin spreading across his face. "Like Tombstone? That what you want, John?" "Seems fitting." Hawkins stepped into the center of the room. "Just you and me. No tricks, no backup. Settle it proper." The gathered crowd backed away, forming a circle. Even the townsmen lowered their weapons, recognizing something ancient and sacred in what was about to happen. "You sure about this, old friend?" Monroe's voice carried that same confidence from their ranger days. "I've been practicing while you've been playing farmer." Hawkins stood relaxed, hands away from his guns. "Talk's always been your strong suit, Jack. Let's see about the rest." Mary moved to intervene, but Reed held her back. "Some things have to end their own way," he said quietly. The two men faced each other across the dusty floor, morning sun streaming through the broken walls. Both had grey in their hair now, lines carved deep in their faces by time and hard choices. But their eyes were sharp as ever, and their hands steady. "Could have been different," Monroe said softly. "Could have built something together like we planned." "Could have stayed honest," Hawkins replied. "Could have remembered what the badge meant." Monroe's laugh was bitter. "Badge? World's changing, John. Badges don't matter anymore. Only money and progress." "Wrong about that, Jack. Some things don't change. Right and wrong, good and evil. The choice a man makes when it matters." The tension built like a thunderstorm about to break. Everyone watching knew they were seeing history being made. The last great gunfight of the Old West. Two legends facing off at dawn. "Call it," Monroe said, hand hovering near his gun. Hawkins nodded slightly. "When the sun clears that wall." Time stretched like molasses. Hearts pounded. No one dared breathe. The morning sun crept slowly across the floor, touching the fallen wall. Monroe moved first, fast as a striking snake, but Swift Hand hadn't earned his name with boasts and stories. His draw was like lightning, the gun seeming to materialize. In his hand, 6 shots rang out, so close together they sounded like one long explosion. When the echo died, Monroe stood frozen, a look of surprise on his face. His gun had cleared leather, but never fired. "You really are that fast?" Hawkins holstered his smoking gun as Monroe fell. "Always was, Jack. You just never wanted to believe it." The legend of Swift Hand would tell that he put all 6 shots through a silver dollar at 20 paces. But the truth was simpler and harder. He'd put them through the heart of a man he'd once called brother. Some debts can only be paid in blood and gun smoke. The aftermath was quieter than the legend would later tell. Monroe's surviving men were taken into custody, their stories of facing the legendary Swift Hand already growing with each telling. Reed personally escorted Martha Wilson's son from the mine, the boy shaken but unharmed. Hawkins stood in the ruins of his ranch, surveying the damage. 20 years of honest work lay in ashes around him, but the cost in human terms weighed heavier. Monroe's body had been covered with his own coat, awaiting the undertaker's wagon. "What happens now?" Mary asked, helping him gather spent cartridges from the yard. Her father's revolver was back in its holster, but her hands still seemed ready to reach for it. "Law will sort out the details," Reed answered, approaching with Sheriff Taylor. "Railroad's backing away fast. Don't want their name connected. Into this mess. Land contracts will be voided." Taylor looked uncomfortable, his badge now a burden rather than a shield. "About Peterson's murder." "Save it," Hawkins cut him off. "Just do better from now on. That badge means something. Remember that." The townspeople began arriving as morning wore on, bringing water for the smoldering fires, food for the survivors, and willing hands for the cleanup. The story was already spreading. how one old rancher and a grieving daughter had stood against an army. "Found this in the barn ruins," Reed said quietly, handing Hawkins a scorched piece of metal, his old marshal's badge, blackened but still recognizable. "Thought you might want it back." Hawkins studied the star for a long moment before passing it to Mary. "Your father believed in what this stands for, died defending it. Reckon you should have it." She took the badge carefully, tears finally coming now that the danger was past. "He'd be proud of today, of what we did here." "Proud of you," Hawkins corrected. "Standing up when others wouldn't. Takes more courage than any gunfight." The undertaker's wagon arrived, followed by the doctor from town. Bodies were collected, wounds tended, statements taken. The machinery of civilization grinding forward, trying to make sense of what had happened. "They'll write about this," Reed predicted, watching. "The activity? Last great gunfight of the territory, end of an era." Hawkins shook his head. "Era's been ending for a while. We just didn't want to see it." The sun climbed higher, drying blood into dust, turning brass cartridges into glinting reminders of violence past. Monroe's death would change things. The railroad would find other ways, less brutal but more subtle. Progress would come, as it always did. But for now, in this moment, the legend of Swift Hand had earned its place in history. Not just for speed with a gun, but for standing against wrong when standing was hardest. For remembering what justice meant when others forgot. The cost had been high, too high, some would say. But as Hawkins watched Mary Peterson pin her father's star to her shirt, he knew some prices had to be paid, some stands had to be made, even if all they left behind was ashes and stories. A month after the gunfight, Hawkins stood on his newly rebuilt porch, watching the sun rise over the New Mexico territory. The barn was taking shape again, townspeople helping with the reconstruction. In the corral, Ghost nickered softly, greeting the morning. Mary Peterson had taken over her father's ranch, wearing the old marshal's badge openly now, not as a law officer, but as a reminder of what it stood for. The railroad had found a different route, one that didn't require burning out honest ranchers. Reed rode up, looking more like his old self with each passing day. The weight of betrayal was still there, but he was working to balance those scales. "Riders coming up from Green Valley," he reported, dismounting. "More folks wanting to hear the story straight from Swift Hand himself." Hawkins smiled slightly. "Story grows bigger every telling. Heard in town yesterday I shot Monroe with one bullet. That split into 6. That's nothing. Down in Texas, they're saying you took on 100 men single-handed." Reed tied his horse to the rail. "Legend's got a life of its own now. Long as they remember the important parts, about standing up when it matters, about right and wrong, being worth the fight." The morning stage brought mail, letters from far-off places, asking about the gunfight. Writers wanting to tell the tale, lawmen seeking advice, young guns wanting to test themselves against the legend. "Going to get busy around here," Reed observed. "Legend of Swift Hand is spreading." But Hawkins was watching a different sight. Mary Peterson riding in with 3 young ranch hands, all wearing simple stars on their vests. A new kind of law, growing from the ashes of the old. "Territory's changing," he said quietly. "Getting civilized, like Jack always said. But maybe it's the right kind of civilized this time." His gun belt still hung by the door, the marshal's Colt ready if needed. But these days, it was mostly for rattlesnakes and coyotes. The legend had served its purpose, reminded people that one person standing for right could make a difference. "Thinking of moving on?" Reed asked, noting how his old friend studied the horizon. "No." Hawkins settled into his porch chair, coffee in hand. "Some things are worth staying for, worth building again." The sun climbed higher over the New Mexico territory. Somewhere out there, other battles were being fought, other stands being made. But here, in this valley, Peace had been earned the old way, with courage, determination, and the speed of a legend's draw. Swift Hand would ride again if needed. But for now, John Hawkins was content to be what he'd always wanted to be. Just a rancher, watching the sun rise over land that had been defended with honor. The territory would remember, the legend would grow, but the truth was, in the quiet moments, in rebuilt barns and mended fences, in young people wearing stars and standing up for what was right. Some legends die, others just change with the times, becoming what each new generation needs them to be. In the end, that was enough.